We're beginning the Roswell section of Magic Eyes Only Earth's Encounters with Extraterrestrial Technology by Ryan S. Wood. Roswell, New Mexico, USA, July 1947. On 8 July 1947, the front page headline of the Roswell Daily Record announced a truly startling story, about which controversy continues to reverberate to this day. RAAF captures flying saucer on ranch in Roswell region. Most remarkably, the newspaper report was based upon an official sanctioned press release issued by Walter Hott, the press information officer at the nearby Roswell Army Airfield (RAAF), and read thus: the many rumors regarding the flying disc became a reality yesterday when the intelligence office of the 509th Bomb Group of the 8th Air Force, Roswell Army Airfield, was fortunate to gain possession of a disc through the cooperation of one of the local ranchers and the sheriff's office of Chavez County. The flying object landed on a ranch near Roswell sometime last week. Not having phone facilities, the rancher stored the disc until such time as he was able to contact the sheriff's office, who in turn notified Major Jesse A. Marshall of the 509th Bomb Group Intelligence Office. Action was immediately taken, and the disc was picked up at the rancher's home. It was inspected at the Roswell Army Airfield and subsequently loaned by Major Marshall to higher headquarters. Not long after this story had spread worldwide, the Army Air Force made a sudden reversal of its previous statement. The entire incident had been a ghastly mistake. What had really been retrieved, asserted the military, was simply the radar reflector from a crashed weather balloon. In an effort to reinforce this altered scenario, Brigadier General Roger Ramey of the 8th Air Force at Fort Worth, Texas, permitted media photographers to take pictures of the debris that a weather balloon look at the debris from a weather balloon, which had conveniently, some said too conveniently, been laid out on the floor of an office at the base. The wreckage on display for the photographers was not partially awe-inspiring, yet for reasons that continue to perplex to this day, the press chose not to question how, or indeed why, someone within a position of authority could confuse what was quite clearly weather balloon debris with the remains of what only 24 hours previously had been touted as originating from a flying disc. The Army's Air Force explanation was accepted without question. Interest in the story dwindled away to nothing, and to the relief of the military, the whole controversy was quietly laid to rest. Aside from the occasional whispers, that situation remained unchanged for more than 3 decades. On 20 July 1978, UFO researcher and author Stanton T. Friedman was at a Baton Rouge, Louisiana TV station to do 3 interviews to promote his LSU lecture, Flying Saucers Are Real. He had done 2, but the third reporter was nowhere to be found. The station manager, Don Allen, knew that Friedman had a busy day scheduled. He was apologetic, offered Friedman coffee, kept looking at his watch. Then, out of the blue, he said, "The guy you ought to talk to is Jesse Marshall," Friedman asked. "Who is he?" The response floored him. "He handled wreckage of one of those saucers you are interested in when he was in the military. He lives over in Houma, Louisiana. He's a great guy. We are old ham radio buddies." Then the overdue reporter showed up, and Allen said nothing more. Friedman called information the next day from the airport, got a number, and spoke with Marshall. "He told me his story," Friedman says, "but he couldn't remember the exact date. I saw a lot of wreckage, but no complete machine," said the long-retired Major Marshall, adding that whatever the nature of the device, he believed that it must have exploded in the air. it had disintegrated before it hit the ground. The wreckage was scattered over an area about 3/4 of a mile long and several hundred feet wide. It was pretty well acquainted with most everything that was in the air that time, both ours and foreign, Marcel added. It was also acquainted with virtually every type of weather observation or radar tracking device being used by either the civilians or the military. Marcel offered his opinion that the debris was not from a weather balloon, as the authorities had insisted after the flying disc story was killed, nor was it from a conventional aircraft or any sort of missile that he was acquainted with. What it was, we didn't know. We just picked up the fragments. His conclusion, it certainly wasn't anything built by us. Then Stan heard the Matthias story, see previous chapter, also without a date. Meanwhile, fellow researcher Bill Moore had found a third story in Flying Saucer Review about English actor Huey Green, who had heard on the radio about a crashed saucer in New Mexico. While driving from Los Angeles to Philadelphia, Green could pin down the date as early as July 1947. Moore went to the University of Minnesota Liberty Periodicals Department, Stan recounts, and found the stories, which gave us an independent check on Marcel's story and gave us lots of names: Hott, Ramey, Newton, Du Bois, Sheriff Wilcox, etc. As a result of their combined research, Friedman and Moore were able to confirm the specific location where the unusual debris had been found all those decades previously. The Foster Ranch, a remote piece of farmland approximately 75 miles north of the town of Roswewll, New Mexico, worked by William Ware Mac Brazel. Brazel had long since passed away by the time Moore and Friedman began their investigation. However, Brazel's family and friends, a number of whom still resided in the close-knit ranching community, remembered the incident well. Recalling from memory the unusual materials found on the ranch, Brazel's son Bill stated that it was something on the order of tinfoil, except that it wouldn't tear. You could wrinkle it and lay it back down, and it immediately resumed its original shape. It was quite pliable, but you couldn't crease or bend it like ordinary metal, almost like a plastic, but definitely metallic in nature. Dad once said that the Army had once told him it was not anything made by us. Jesse Marcel would also elaborate upon the apparent extraordinary properties presented in the material that he recovered. It could not be bent or broken or even dented by a 16-pound sledgehammer, almost weightless like a metal with plastic properties. Friedman and Moore did 90% of the work to uncover and document 62 witnesses and related parties before the first-length book, Roswell Incident, co-authored by Moore and the late writer Charles Berlitz, was published in 1980. 5 years later, ongoing research had resulted in the discovery of nearly 100 people who, to varying degrees, had either first or second-hand knowledge of what had occurred at Roswell, practically none of which seemed to support the military's weather balloon scenario. In July 1985, Moore lectured at the annual symposium of the Mutual UFO Network, MUFON, which was held that year in St. Louis, Missouri. During the course of his speech, Moore disclosed what had occurred when Friedman spoke with Louis Bill Rickett, a former Counterintelligence Corps CIC officer stationed in Roswell at the time of the incident, regarding rumors of strange or alien bodies said to have been recovered at the time of the incident at Roswell. When I mentioned bodies, Friedman recalls, Rickett clearly reacted and indicated that this was an area he couldn't talk about. He indicated there were different levels of security about this work, that a directive had come down placing that had that a directive had come down placing this at a high level. He went on to say that certain subjects were discussed only in rooms that couldn't be bugged. Additional data on the Roswell controversy secured by the investigation team of Kevin Randall and Don Schmidt burst forth in the late 1980s to mid-1990s. Randall was a captain in the Air Force Reserve who started out a skeptic on Roswell. Randall and Schmidt co-wrote 2 books on the Roswell controversy, arrived at the conclusion that on the evening of 4 July 1947, an alien space vehicle catastrophically crashed some distance from the town of Roswell, New Mexico. Having already dumped a liberal degree of wreckage on the Foster Ranch, the vehicle, claimed a number of Randall Schmidt's informants, no more than 30 feet in length and somewhat... that didn't make any sense. The vehicle claimed a number of Randall Schmidt's informants. Did it kill them? Was no more than 30 feet in length and somewhat narrow. Was a bat-like wing. After World War I, Thomas Gonzalez returned to active status and was stationed at a Roswell Army airfield. Gonzalez described the object as an airfoil. Johnny McBoyle, journalist and part owner of KSWS Radio, stationed in Roswell, described viewing a big crumpled dishpan, and the admittedly controversial Frank Kaufman referred to the device as being heel-shaped. In 1996, a source using the pseudonym Thomas Cantwell provided UFO researcher Tim Cooper with Majestic documents that have dramatically cracked the UFO wall of secrecy. See afterward. Cantwell provided a document and drawing of the unidentified aerodyne found on July 5th, 1947, south of Socorro, New Mexico, by military and civilian members of the Armed Forces Special Weapons Project. This document is reproduced in the center photo section of this book. While the exact shape is open to discussion, this craft was not the traditional flying saucer shape. It also seems clear that what was described as south of Socorro was not the Foster Ranch saucer and debris field. Let's see if we can find a picture of this. Not a whole lot to look at. I'm just going to keep going. Louis Rickett stated that he became an integral part of the Roswell story in September 1947 when he spent some time working alongside Dr. Lincoln La Paz of the University of New Mexico. Dr. La Paz was also a mathematician with interests in the fields of ballistics and meteorites. Rickett recalled that he and La Paz were given a job to ascertain the speed and trajectory. My God, I can barely say that. Trajectory of the device that crashed near Roswell. Rickett additionally asserted that I'm just not in it today, man. Rickett additionally asserted that the pair had discovered a possible touchdown point 5 miles northwest of the debris field discovered by Mac Brazel, where the sand had apparently crystallized, possibly as a result of exposure to high temperatures. Rickett and La Paz reportedly spent no less than 3 weeks conducting interviews with people in the area with knowledge of the events at Roswell. According to Rickett, La Paz authored a report on their combined discoveries that was delivered to the Pentagon. Although Rickett never got to read the report, he stated that it was La Paz's conclusion that the Roswell device was an unmanned interplanetary probe. On the more controversial issue of alien bodies reportedly discovered at the scene, the research team of Randall and Schmidt concluded that as many as 5 subjects, albeit in very cryptic fashion, were Edwin Easley and the provost marshal at Roswell, who made brief comments as he lay on his deathbed about the creatures, and Sergeant McLevin E. Brown, who recalled that they looked Asian but had larger heads and no hair. They looked a yellowy color. The aforementioned Thomas Gonzalez offered a succinct description of the bodies as being like those of little men. Similar accounts of and recollections proliferate, including that the Similar accounts and recollections proliferate, including that of Dr. L.A. June Foster, an authority on the human spinal cord, who had held a security clearance and who had worked undercover for the FBI during the Second World War. According to research of Schmidt and Randall, Foster was flown to Washington, D.C. following the crash where she looked... Where did I get that from? Following the crash where she was ordered to help study the spinal structures of the retrieved bodies and report that it was possible to one had survived the initial impact, though in a severely injured condition. Foster would also assert that the strange bodies were short in stature, with larger than normal craniums. Most controversial as of all, Foster was advised by the keepers of the Roswell secret. What? Foster was advised by the keepers of the Roswell secret. It's amazing how comprehension and tempo goes along with one another. That if she spoke about her involvement, she would be killed. Frankie Rowe, whose father was attached to the Roswell Fire Department in 1947, was also subjected to death threats. Rowe recalls that her father once confided to the family that he had seen both debris and bodies at Roswell and one live creature at the crash site. The one that was walking about was about the size of a 10-year-old child, and it didn't have any hair. It seemed so scared and lost and afraid. Several days later, claims Rao, 3 military policemen came to the family home and said that if anyone talked, they might just take us out in the middle of the desert and shoot all of us, and nobody would ever find us. A similar story comes from Glenn Dennis, a mortician at Ballard's funeral home in Roswell, who stated that he received a very unusual telephone call from the mortuary officer at Roswell. He was inquiring about what size, what type of casket, and how small were the caskets that we could furnish that could be hermetically sealed, said Dr. Dennis. Dennis would later sign a sworn affidavit asserting that a nurse friend at the base had confided to him that an autopsy of the bodies had been secretly undertaken at Roswell Army Airfield. She went into this room to get some supplies and saw 2 doctors in there with a gurney and these small bodies that were in a rubber sheet or body pouch. 2 of the bodies had been very badly mangled, like maybe the predators had been eating on them. One of the hands was severed from the body, and when they flipped it over, there were little tiny suction cups on the insides of the fingers. The heads were very large, eyes were set in, the skulls were soft like a newborn's baby. They were pliable. The ears, instead of 1 canal, had 2 canals. No lobes or anything, just a little flap over each canal. The mouths were just very small slits. Their face and nose were concave. Lydia Sleppy, who worked as a teletype operator in Albuquerque at the radio station during the summer of 1947, when reporter Johnny McBoyle excitedly telephoned her to say he had personally viewed a big crumpled dishpan on the Foster Ranch at 4 p.m. on Monday, 7th July 1947. She quickly recognized the significance of his account. According to Sleppy's memory, McBoyle added breathlessly, "The Army is there and they are going to pick it up. And get this, they're saying something about little men on board." Half a century later, McBoyle declined to discuss precisely what it was that he stumbled upon at the Foster Ranch. 24 hours after Johnny McBoyle's desert encounter with the unknown, the FBI office at Dallas, Texas, forwarded a teletype message to FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover that summarized the data that the Bureau had uncovered on the incident at Roswell. This particular teletype is notable by virtue of the fact that it is one of the very few officially declassified and 100% verifiable documents on the case that have surfaced under the terms of the Freedom of Information Act. It reads, Major Edwin E. Curtin, Headquarters 8th Air Office, telephonically advised this office that an object purporting to be a flying disc was recovered near Roswell, New Mexico this date. This disc is hexagonal in shape and was suspended from balloon by cable, which balloon was approximately 20 feet in diameter. Major Curtin further advised that the object found resembled a high-altitude weather balloon with a radar reflector, but that telephonic conversation between their office and Wright Field had not borne out this belief. Disc and balloon being transported to Wright Field by special plane for examination. Information provided this office because of national interest in the case, and fact that National Broadcasting Company, Associated Press, and others attempting to break the story of the location of the disc today, Major Curtin advised would request Wright Field to advise Cincinnati office results of examination. No further investigation could be conducted. It is abundantly clear from examining this piece of data that the FBI was only in possession of one aspect of the controversy, that aspect having been supplied by Major Edwin M. Curtin of Army Air Force Intelligence at Fort Worth. Moreover, it would appear that the FBI was deliberately fed the story that the disc recovered at Roswell was nothing stranger than a weather balloon and was being forwarded to Wright Field for further study, as part of a deliberate attempt to confuse the real story even more. On the issue of what may be known about the Roswell story at an official level as a result of inquiries initiated in 1993 with the General Accounting Office by the late U.S. Congressman Stephen Schiff of New Mexico, the Air Force changed its stance on Roswell, stating in a massive 1995 document titled The Roswell Report that debris found by Rancher Brazel most likely originated with a top-secret project named Mogul, the purpose of which was to utilize balloons in the detection of Soviet atomic bomb detonations. Some sources suggest that Mogul, in addition to the atomic detection mission, was developed as a potential platform for biological, chemical, or other weapons. There is no corroboration to date, but it suggests opportunities for further investigation. Then in 1997, the Air Force felt compelled to address the alien body rumors, concluding in another official publication titled Roswell Report, case closed, that the stories were largely the result of faulty recollections of people seeing the crash test dummies that had been used in parachute experiments, experiments that the Air Force conveniently neglected to explain had not even begun until the early 1950s. In addition to the witness testimony pertaining to the events at Roswell, a second source of data surfaced in the 1980s that had major bearing on the case. Collectively, the source of data is referred to as the Majestic 12 documents. The Majestic 12 affair involves tales of crashed UFOs, dead aliens in possession of the U.S. government, the possible theft and unarmed release of highly declassified documents, and a shadowy counterintelligence operation, at the heart of which some believe lies the undeniable evidence that humankind is not alone in the universe. Following the publication of his co-authored 1980 book, Roswell Incident, William Moore was contacted by a number of military and intelligence insiders who claimed that they wished to reveal to Moore, and ultimately to the public, the media, and the world, classified data and documents on UFOs that would otherwise never see the light of day. It was as a result of this deep throat style contact that Moore and his research partner Jamie Shandera obtained in 1984 a series of controversial and official-looking documents that detailed the existence and work of an allegedly top-secret group known as Majestic 12. Supposedly established in 1947 by then-President Harry Truman, Majestic 12 was tasked with keeping the lid on the extraterrestrial secret while striving to understand and exploit the science and technology inherent in the material that had literally fallen into the hands of the United States government in the desert of New Mexico. At the heart of these documents was a several-page top-secret memorandum titled Briefing Document Operation Majestic 12, prepared for President-elect Dwight D. Eisenhower, eyes only, 18 November 1952. It was later stamped Top Secret, Magic Eyes Only. The briefing described how, following public hysteria in 1947 over UFO sightings in Washington state and secret recovery of crashed objects in New Mexico, President Truman created Operation Majestic 12 as a top-secret research and development intelligence operation responsible directly and only to the President of the United States. The document, first published in 1987 by the British author Timothy Good in his book Above Top Secret, revealed the membership of Majestic 12 to include high-ranking military personnel and senior sources within the intelligence community, as well as key scientific personnel in post-World War II America. Understandably, the documents have been subject of much controversy and comment, with some researchers believing them to be the real thing, while others cry hoax and/or disinformation. Following the initial release to Moore and Shandera in 1984, literally thousands of additional pages of Majestic 12 documentation surfaced in the late 1990s from a California UFO researcher, Timothy Cooper, now retired, asserting that this sensational body of information came to him from a number of retired insider whistleblowers attached to the military and the murky world of American intelligence. Cooper shared his collection of documents with the father and son research team of Dr. Robert and Ryan Wood of www.majesticdocuments.com, now home to the most comprehensive online collection of data supporting materials and research papers on the Majestic documents. While the documents themselves touch upon numerous issues of a UFO nature, it is with respect to the Roswell controversy that they have attached most interest. Regarding the strange bodies found at Roswell, one particular document made available to the Wood team by Cooper, dated 1947 and referred to as the Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit summary, declared, "It appeared that none of the 5 crew members survived entry into our atmosphere due to unknown causes. Dr. Detlev Bronk has been asked to assist in the autopsy of one well-preserved cadaver to be done by Major Charles E. Rhea. From what descriptions the team was able to learn, and from photographs taken by intelligence photographers, the occupants appear in most respects human, with some anatomical differences in the head, eyes, hands, and feet. They have a slight build, above 5 feet tall, with grayish-pink skin color. They have no hair on their bodies and clothed with a tight-fitting flight suit that appears to be fireproof. Some of the bodies looked as if they had been burned on the head and hands. Their overall stature reminds one of young children. It is believed that there were male and female genders present, but was hard to distinguish. These beings appeared to be of a different type than the often reported smaller gray beings. A later Majestic Special Operations Manual for Extraterrestrial Recoveries describes 2 such species. It is possible that, while documents largely agree, other variations in detail derive from the highly compartmented nature of the security, in which the fewest possible persons had all the data. A further and similar document, also supplied by Cooper, titled Memorandum for the Military Assessment of the Joint Intelligence Committee, dated 19 September 1947, states, "The recovery of unidentified platform aircraft in the state of New Mexico on 6 July 1947, 10 miles northwest of Oscura Peak, and a debris field 75 miles northwest of the Army's 509th Atomic Bomb Group, Roswell Army Airfield, is confirmed. A subsequent capture of another similar craft 30 miles east of the Army's Alamogordo Army Airfield on 5th July 1947 has convinced the Army Air Force's S-2, Army G-2, and Navy ONI, Office of Naval Intelligence, I believe, that the craft and wreckage are not of U.S. manufacture. The collective body of Majestic 12 documentation is of a similar nature, if genuine. The documents suggest that a highly restricted level elements of the U.S. military, government, and intelligence community have had in place since at least 1947, a classified operation designed to study and back-engineer UFOs as well as to examine and autopsy their unusually deceased crews, recovered as a result of a number of crash incidents in the United States and elsewhere. Though Roswell is viewed by many as the most credible of all crashed UFO accounts, the controversy surrounding what did or did not occur in the New Mexico desert in the summer of 1947 shows no sign of being resolved. No, it doesn't. Next incident in Kiev, Ukraine, summer 1947. According to data revealed by Russian UFO crash retrieval investigator Anton Aflov, the summer of 1947, during the rebuilding of the city of Kiev, which had been decimated by the Nazis during the Second World War, workers discovered buried underground a strange object described as a silvery, seamless, streamlined, cylinder, arrow-shaped object about 3 to 3.5 meters in diameter and 5 to 6 meters long. Reportedly, the object was excavated, and a team of military field engineers was brought in to deal with the find. It was subsequently transferred to a location northwest of Moscow that would also house the first Soviet Missile Research Center. An examination of the body allegedly confirmed that it was not a foreign missile as had been initially assumed, but had possibly been buried underground for up to 5,000 years. Entry to the device revealed the presence of two small chairs for two very small pilots and an array of sophisticated equipment. According to Anflov, reverse engineering of the alien craft was undertaken from the 1950s to the 1970s, something that Anflov further adds promoted Soviet missile and space technology, including the design of metal alloys, instrumental design, control systems, and some construction elements. Next incident in Paradise Valley, Arizona, United States of America, October 1947. The first indication that something of a crashed UFO nature might have occurred at Paradise Valley, Arizona in October 1947 surfaced from Silas Newton. He was a convicted man from Colorado who would also become one of the central players in the tale of the alleged UFO crash site at Aztec, New Mexico in 1948. Possible corroboration for the reality of the Paradise Valley affair was brought to light in 1987 by British researcher Timothy Good. Good, the author of Above Top Secret, interviewed a man named Selman Graves, who claimed to have witnessed aspects of the retrieval of a strange object in Paradise Valley. According to Graves, he briefly witnessed seeing in the sand at Paradise Valley, and in the correct time frame, a large circular-shaped object that was more than 30 feet in diameter. Graves knew little more than that, and the details provided by Silas Newton to author Frank Scully, published in his book Behind the Flying Saucers, are very brief indeed. To date, additional evidence concerning the particular report has failed to surface into the public domain. I wonder if that's where Scully gets her name in, what's that show from the 90s? I can't think of it now. Next incident, Guadalupe, Mexico, October 1947. Found by this author and Nick Redfern within the now declassified files of the White Sands Proving Ground, New Mexico, now the White Sands Missile Range, that are housed at the National Archives and Records Administration, Maryland, is the following document that references the crash of an unknown missile on Mexican territory in October 1947. 17th October 1947, Director of Research and Development Office, Deputy Chief of Staff, Material Unknown Missile of Mexico. I guess I could read this. Investigation of the unknown missiles which landed near Guadalupe. I can't read that. Opposite Mubay, Texas on 12 October 1947 has failed so far to identify it as a V-2, GAPA, or other type of guided missile. Careful check USAF, can't read, and Navy indicates that no missiles were fired from Alamo Gordo Special Range or White Sands Proving Ground on 12 October 1947. Army ground forces have eliminated possibility of an anti-aircraft target having gone astray. Negotiations with the Mexican government for the long-range proving ground for guided missiles which have been started through the State Department may have jeopardized if Mexico is dissatisfied with the investigation. It is understood that newspaper statements that fragments of a V2 have been identified are disturbing the Mexican government. Difficult to read. Investigation of the unknown missile which landed near Guadalupe. Oh, wow. On 12 October 1947 has failed so far to identify it as a V-2 Gappa or other type of guided missile. Careful check by USAF Ordnance and Navy indicates that no missiles were fired from Alamogordo Special Range of White Sands Proving Ground on 12 October 1947. Army Ground Forces has eliminated possibility of an anti-aircraft target having gone astray. Negotiations with the Mexican government for long-range proving ground for guided missiles, which have been started through the State Department, may be jeopardized if Mexico is dissatisfied with the investigation. It is understood that newspaper statements that the fragments of the V-2 shape have been identified are disturbing the Mexican government. Wow, I actually did a pretty good job reading that old thing. It is logical to infer from the description of what the missile is not and the memo's author, Mr. Roddy, and that a conventional explanation is extremely remote, and that he is concerned that the Mexican government is not buying the cover story the newspapers are running, that it's a V-2. Whatever the nature of this unknown missile, its identity appears to have been resolved, or if the incident was explained, the facts remain certainly outside the public domain. Next incident of Aztec, New Mexico, USA, March 1948. Next to the so-called Roswell incident of July 1947, certainly the most talked about, dissected, championed, promoted, and discredited UFO crash site of all is that which is alleged to have occurred in the vicinity of Aztec, New Mexico in 1948. According to information related to the author Frank Scully in the late 1940s and subsequently published in his best-selling 1950 book Behind the Flying Saucers, as a result of a number of separate incidents in 1947 and 1948, the wreckage of 4 alien spacecraft and no fewer than 34 alien bodies had been recovered by U.S. authorities and were being studied undercover for the utmost secrecy in defense establishments in the United States. As Scully was willing to admit, the bulk of his information had come from 2 prime sources. Silas Mason Newton described it in a 1941 FBI report as a wholly unethical businessman, and Doe, Mr. Gee, the name given to protect 8 scientists, all of whom had supposedly divulged various details of the crashes to Newton and Scully. According to Scully's sources, one such UFO was found in Hart Canyon, near the town of Aztec in March 1948. Located in the spectacular Four Corners area where New Mexico, Colorado, Utah, and Arizona meet, Aztec lies 180 miles northwest of Albuquerque and 300 miles southwest of Denver. Surrounded on 3 sides by Indian reservations, Navajo, Ute, and Apache, Aztec sits at the heart of Indian country. Sandstone mesas overshadow lush river valleys. The snow-covered peaks of the San Juan Mountains shimmer in the north. Unique badlands of the Bitsy Wilderness lie to the south, and heading west you cross the Navajo Reservation, passing Shiprock. On the way to Monument Valley, the town is also home to famous Aztec ruins, National Monument, a 450-room pueblo that is ancestral to the modern Anasazi communities of New Mexico, and that was first built in the early 1100s, used by the dwellers of Chaco Canyon. It was later modified and used by people more akin to those inhabiting Mesa Verde. The reconstructed Great Kiva at the site served as the center for the community wide events and ceremonies, and today boasts of being the largest such reconstruction kiva in North America. But what about the most controversial aspect of the town's history? After the Aztec saucer crashed, so the story goes, it was located essentially intact by elements of the U.S. military that gained access to the object via punctured porthole. Inside were found the bodies. Reports varied from 216 small human-like creatures, all charred and dead. The UFO was then dismantled, whereupon it and bodies of the crew were transferred to Wright Field in Dayton, Ohio for study. At the time of its release, Scully's book caused a major sensation. In both 1952 and 1953, however, J.P. Kahn, a reporter who had previously worked for the San Francisco Chronicle, authored two detailed exposés which cast extreme doubt on the claims of Newton and Dr. Yee, identified not as 8 scientists, but as one Leo Gabor, who had a background equally as dubious as that of Newton. Yet, as the years had shown, the Aztec crashed UFO incident refuses to roll over and die. Indeed, it has now spawned a whole industry. In 1974, for example, Professor John Spencer Carr revealed that he had in his possession what was deemed to be credible information of the case, including testimony from a senior U.S. Air Force officer who was allegedly involved in the retrieval of the Aztec UFO. 12 months later, however, the event was once again demolished, this time by one Mike McClellan, in a persuasive paper titled The UFO Crash of 1948 is a Hoax. In view of this, it was something of a surprise when, in 1987, the researcher William Steinman released his own book, UFO Crash at Aztec, which asserted that the incident did occur and that Frank Scully's book was in essence factually correct. And just to compound things further, following the release of the Steinman book, Fate magazine reported that the book draws on speculation, rumor, unnamed informants, and unbridled paranoia to defend and elaborate on the original story. Here we see the major problem with the Aztec story. Both Newton and Gebauer were at best dubious conmen. Scully published their testimony without question, and Steinman made the fatal mistake of largely looking at the affair from the perspective of a believer. As a result, the whole story still remains unresolved after more than half a century. Did a UFO crash to Earth in the harsh desert near Aztec, New Mexico? Were diminutive alien bodies recovered at the crash site? Was the incident successfully concealed by a concerned U.S. military? Were the key players in the story all that they appeared to be? And if not, then exactly what did occur at Aztec on the fateful day in 1948? To answer those questions, we have to turn, surprisingly, to the U.S. government. While official documentation pertaining to the allegedly similar events at Roswell the previous summer is practically non-existent, the exact opposite can be said about Aztec. Frank Scully's mysterious Mr. Gee, born Leo Arnold Julius Gabor on 25th July 1903, is the subject of an FBI file that totals no less than 398 pages. Interestingly, of that file, fewer than 200 pages have been declassified under the provisions of the Freedom of Information Act. The available papers amply demonstrate that Gabor was, to put it mildly, a colorful character. To begin with, he had numerous aliases, including Harry A. Gabor, Harry A. Gabor, Harry A. Graybauer, Harry A. Barbar, Leo A.J. Gabor, Leo Arnold Julius Gabor, and Arnold Julius Leopold Gabor. A confidential FBI report of 19th December 1941 states Gabauer made some disturbing political statements prior to America's entry into World War II. What this country needs is a man like Hitler. Then everybody would have a good job. It would be a God's blessing if we had two men in the United States to run this country like Hitler. The English people are nothing but a dirty bunch of rats. We should stay home and tend to our own damned business and let Germany give England what they had coming. Gabauer went on to describe Hitler as a swell fellow, adding that the guy who shoots President Roosevelt should be given a gold medal. As FBI Special Agent J.J. McGuire noted, Gabauer is always pointing out the good points of the German government over the English and our democratic form of government. It's a republic, you idiots. God. Controversy continued to surround Gabor in later years. The memo dated 14 February 1969 from the Denver office of the FBI referred to an unnamed source who threatened to do bodily harm to Gabor and demanded $50,000 as part of commission due to him. How do you say this name? Silas. Silas Mason Newton, Frank Scully's main source for the Aztec UFO story, attracted his own share of controversy as well. An FBI document dated 30 September 1970 states, Newton was born on July 19, 1887, at Shelby County, Kentucky. He is divorced and is a college graduate. He has claimed his occupation was that of a geologist who has an income of $500 a month. He claims to have a Bachelor of Science in Geology from Baylor University and to have studied for 6 months at Oxford University, but a further FBI reports of 1970 reveals Silas Newton, presently under indictment in Los Angeles, California for fraud, returned to Silver City, New Mexico area January 1970 and began to organize what appears as a mining swindle. What was it that brought Newton and Gabor and crashed UFOs into the world of Frank Scully? The FBI took a keen interest in the intricacies of the Aztec affair, and its 1952 files tell a notable story. Regarding the saucer story in July 1949, Gabor, as a specialist in geomagnetics, became a consultant to Newton, an alleged geophysicist using instruments of his own design to make microwave surveys of oil pools. Newton had been a friend of Scully, who writes a weekly column for Variety, and in the fall of 1949, Gabor discussed saucers with Newton and Scully, at which time he claimed to have conducted secret inquiries with the government and other scientists on several saucers, which had landed in New Mexico and Arizona. Gabor claimed to have recovered from these saucers the tubeless radios, some small gears, and small discs, all of which materials had been secreted by Gabor from the other scientists and government investigators. The three men agreed to publish a story of Gabor's discoveries, but because of Gabor's connections with the matter, he was to be identified only as Dr. Gee to determine the reaction of the public to an unauthenticated story of the actual existence of flying saucers. On March 8, 1950, Newton and Scientist X appeared as a guest lecturer before a science class at Denver University. Newton told of Dr. Gee's findings, and the substance of the lecture leaked out to the newspapers. As a result, Scully wrote his book setting the forth Dr. Gee's discoveries and revelations. After reading the saucer story, J.P. Kahn noted several inconsistencies, and he decided to initiate an investigation to determine whether the story was based on facts or a hoax. In the beginning, he went to Scully, but was unable to obtain the identity of Dr. Gee, and Scully was reluctant to produce Newton. Kahn and Newton in Scully's home, at which time Newton claimed to be a graduate of Baylor University and Yale University and a postgraduate of the University of Berlin. Newton promised to discuss with Dr. Gee the proposition to disclose fully and authenticated announcement that spaceships were landing on Earth, together with photographs, medals, and other evidence. Newton exhibited a couple of gears, fine-toothed and about the size of pocket watches, and 2 discs, unknown metals, all being tied up in Newton's handkerchief. He alleged these items were obtained from one of the saucers. Newton also told Kahn of seeing secret detailed plans on the airflow system of the B-26s in Dr. Gee's laboratories in Phoenix, on which the mysterious Dr. Gee was doing research for the government. Dr. Gee had developed a magnetic fog, rain, and darkness dispelling screen to be fitted on the windshields of airplanes to enable the pilot to see through any weather. While in Dr. Scully's book, Dr. Gee was said to have degrees from the University of Berlin, Gebauer only claimed electrical engineering degrees from Louis Institute of Technology in Chicago in 1931 or 1932. That while the book claimed from 1943 to 1945, Dr. Gee had headed 1,700 scientists doing experimental work in the secret magnetic research. Dr. Gebauer was merely chief of laboratories of Air Research Company in Phoenix and Los Angeles, mainly in charge of maintenance equipment. Kahn talked with Gebauer and obtained a signed statement from him denying that he was Dr. Gee mentioned in Scully's book, and stating that he had no connection with Scully, his book, or statements, and had given Scully no authority to infer that he was Dr. Gee. Gebauer did state that he was acquainted with Newton. At Newton's 8 March 1950 lecture at Denver University, where he was billed as Scientist X. If the lecture was not actually attended by the agents of the FBI, it was certainly monitored by them. An urgent teletype of 9 March from the FBI office at Denver confirms their awareness of Newton's talk. 2 sources advised today that Silas Newton has given at least 1, possibly more, lectures before classes at Denver University yesterday or today, in which he discussed flying saucers, which he alleged he personally observed. This person claims to have seen several such objects, one of which allegedly landed in New Mexico. He also claims to have observed occupants of saucers described by him as of human form, but about 3 feet tall. Newton had been escorted to the lecture by George T. Kohler, who was at that time a staff member of the Rocky Mountain radio station. Curiously, behind the flying saucers, Frank Scully reported that within 2 hours of Newton's lecture, U.S. intelligence agents were asking questions about Newton and the nature of his talk, and what the general consensus of opinion was with respect to Newton's revelations. In addition, there is evidence to show that George T. Kohler was relieved of certain audio tapes after he had the foresight to surreptitiously record an interview between himself and a representative of the U.S. Army. "We know you have been recording these interviews," Kohler was told. "Now hand them over." Matters took an even more bizarre turn when a Kansas City car dealer named Rudy Fick began telling stories to the effect that Kohler had informed him that Kohler, had crashed the gate at a radar station near the New Mexico-Arizona border and had actually seen two flying saucers that the military had in its possession. One of the aircraft was supposedly badly damaged while the other was relatively intact. Once again, officialdom took note, as the following extract from FBI records make clear. According to the information given, Kohler, around 50 of these flying saucers have been found in the United States in a period of 2 years. Of these, 40 are the U.S. Research Bureau in Los Angeles. Each of the craft had a crew of 3. The bodies in the damaged ship were charred, but the other ship's occupants were in a perfect state of preservation, although dead. All were uniform in height of 3 feet, beardless, and their teeth were completely free of fillings or cavities. They wore no undergarments, but had their bodies taped and were dressed in a sort of wire. Mr. Fick feels that the security department of the military feared that the sudden shock of a surprise announcement that interplanetary travel is possible might cause hysteria. OSI District 13 will interview Fick. The editor of the Klaus, Kansas Star stated that while they were aware of this story, they did not dare publish it in the paper because it is too fantastic. A partly censored FBI document of 22 March 1950 shows that a story very similar to that told by Fick was in circulation in Washington, D.C. as well. One-page report from the FBI special agent in charge at Washington, Guy Hodel, to J. Edgar Hoover states, "An investigator for the Air Force stated that 3 so-called flying saucers had been recovered in New Mexico. They were described as being circular in shape with raised centers approximately 50 feet in diameter. Each one was occupied by 3 bodies of human shape but only 3 feet tall, dressed in metallic cloth of a very fine texture. Each body was bandaged in a manner similar to the blackout suits used by speed flyers and test pilots. According to Mr. Deleted Informant, the saucers were found in New Mexico due to the fact that the government has a very high-powered radar set up in the area, and it is believed the radar interferes with the controlling mechanism of the saucers. Although its contents are at first glance eye-opening, UFO investigator William Moore, who with Charles Berlitz co-wrote the book The Roswell Incident, asserts that the document is largely worthless since its origins can be traced from Fick to Kohler and ultimately to Newton, whose testimony must be considered less than credible. Of course, pro-Aztec researchers maintain that if Newton and Gebohr were in possession of information that was even remotely accurate, then the memo of 22 March 1950 should not be ignored. Was the Newton-Gebohr-Scully story factually correct? Was Gebohr the elusive Dr. Gee, or was the entire matter without foundation? Here things become decidedly murky. In 1958, both Newton and Gebohr received suspended prison sentences for their part in defrauding one Herman Flater, a Colorado businessman who owned the Stay Put clamp and coupling factory on the outskirts of Denver, which again does not inspire confidence in their word, and yet for all the faults of Newton and Gebohr, there are a number of intriguing pointers that continue to breathe life into the Aztec affair. As far as Gebohr was concerned, it is a proven fact that in the 1940s he definitely was employed as chief of laboratories at the Air Research Manufacturing Company, Phoenix. It so happens that of the 4 alleged UFO crashes discussed in Frank Scully's book, one alleged occurred north of Phoenix at Paradise Valley in 1947. The researcher Timothy Good has revealed that he spoke with a private pilot, Selman Graves, who described witnessing aspects of an operation to retrieve a large aluminum dome-shaped thing in the Paradise Valley area, around which were pitched buildings, tents, and men moving about. Given that Leo Gabor had been employed during the early 1940s in the aerospace industry, relatively close to where this event supposedly occurred, the possibility that he may have gleaned details of the alleged event from former colleagues at Air Research cannot be wholly dismissed. And with respect to Gabor, there is one final point that deserves comment of the portions of the FBI file that have remained classified. A number of pages are exempt from release. In the interest of national defense, according to the FBI, concerning Silas Newton, several issues should be noted. First, although a 1970s FBI file on Newton describes him as an accomplished conman of many years' standing, who is knowledgeable in the field of petroleum and mining and has exploited this knowledge in swindling people. Earlier FBI papers refer to an interesting statement made by Newton in the 21st October 1952 issue of the Denver Post. According to the newspaper, Newton had advised that he had never seen a flying saucer nor had ever pretended to have seen one. Newton stated he was merely repeating what he heard from other sources. Considering that Newton was an accomplished conman, why on this occasion did he seem curiously intent on playing down his role in the Aztec case and in the UFO controversy as a whole? If there was a suspicion, or indeed a fear, on Newton's part, that he was possibly in possession of classified information, things become more understandable. Second, a fascinating piece of documentary evidence relative to the Aztec case has surfaced thanks to the investigative author Carl Pflock, namely extracts from Newton's personal diary from the 1970s. In the diary, Newton revealed that in the early 1950s he was contacted by military officials who wished to speak with him about his crashed UFO story. Newton was told that the military knew that his UFO crash at Aztec story was bogus. Incredibly, however, they wanted him to continue spreading the story far and wide and to whoever would listen. Newton asserted in his diary that while he might not have known too much about the crashed UFOs, he had no doubt that his mysterious contacts certainly did know a great deal about the subject. This raises a number of important questions. Was Newton, as a convicted and known con man, asked to continue telling his largely discredited tale because it acted as a convenient smokescreen for the military to hide a real crashed UFO behind? Or is there another reason why the military would want to spread fake stories about the U.S. government being in possession of a crashed UFO? Possibly. The U.S. intelligence community is known to have made use of the UFO controversy as a tool of psychological warfare in the 1950s. It is conceivable that such stories were purposefully spread at the height of the Cold War to try and convince the Soviets that the U.S. had access to a technology the Soviets could only dream of? Or is this yet another of Silas Newton's grand games, a game designed to ensure that even from beyond the grave he continues to stir the Aztec cauldron? In any event, the Aztec case does not rest solely on the likes of Newton and Gabor. There are other less flamboyant figures who also claim some knowledge of a UFO crash site in Aztec. In 2002, investigative journalist Linda Moulton Howe, editor of EarthFiles.com, interviewed members of the Pace family in Farmington, New Mexico, who recalled hearing news of a crashed UFO back in the late 1940s. Howe explains, in March 1949, Geneva and Hulan Pace and their 9-year-old son Glenn were living in a rented house on Lincoln Street in Farmington, New Mexico. While their new house was being built, all three remember a newspaper headline in the Farmington Times Hustler about a crashed disc in Hart Canyon, 11 miles northeast of Aztec. The elder Paces thought it was March of 1949 when they were renting. I interviewed them at their Farmington home on March 22, 2002 for radio and EarthFiles.com. The date might have been a year earlier, but could not have been later because the Hustler changed to the Farmington Daily Times on August 1st, 1949. Hulan Pace, we saw the story in the paper, and the wife and I went to the college up here to locate that paper, but we can't find it anywhere. But it's well known throughout the community here that there was a crash site of a saucer out northeast of Aztec. Glenn Pace, born 1940, I remember reading the headline, and my mom read the whole article to us in the living room at the dining table. It said a UFO had crashed near Aztec up in Hart Canyon, and the government had come and took the craft and carried it away. The article really existed. How in the world the government, got them is beyond me. Furthermore, Howe says, Aztec UFO investigator Scott Ramsey made contact with relatives of two former Aztec and Cuba, New Mexico police officers who told their families that they saw a crashed disc in Hart Canyon. The year given was 1948. Ramsey told Howe that the policemen said they saw on the Hart Canyon Mesa one night in 1948, probably March. Scott Ramsey, he police officer, finally said to the family that actually did happen. I was one of the police officers at the crash site that day. Going back to the family members, they remember him saying, I was one of the police officers at the scene. Apparently, though, there were 3 involved. The one I will mention, and that was Andy Andrews, he was probably in his 50s back at that time of the Aztec incident. We don't really pinpoint him at the crash site, although he may have been with the Cuba police officer going up the Highway 44 the night of the alleged crash. Linda Howe, what exactly did they describe they saw? Ramsey, a large saucer-shaped object, no visible markings, no seams, no rivets, weld marks perfectly smooth, more pewter in color. Going back to Ken Farley and Doug Nolan, and the 2 police officers are going back and retrieving the testimonies from their families. They kept using the words, looked like it had been molded absolutely perfectly. No seams, very smooth, pewter in color, sort of a dull gray color. 2 lenses put together with a 15 to 18 foot diameter bubble in the middle. What about the entities? Ramsey. Doug Nolan did say he saw at least 2. Again, if you give a little bit of background on Doug Nolan, he was a 19-year-old employee of the El Paso Oil Company back at this time. That's why we are pinpointing it to 1948 based on his 19-year-old age. He was getting ready for work. They started very early out in the oil field. His boss, Bill Ferguson, who is also deceased, when Doug picked him up, said, we've got to Get out to Heart Canyon immediately. There's a bad brush fire, and it's near one of the drip tanks the company owned. They went out, Bill Ferguson being the lead man at the time, the senior man, and there lay the disc out at the end of the mesa. How? Were there entities there? Ramsey. Doug and Bill Ferguson climbed up on the craft and looked in the window, and Doug said he could see two human-like humanoid beings slumped over. Whatever the ultimate truth about the Aztec UFO crash, it is serious business for people of the town. Flying saucer-related memorabilia can be found in numerous stores throughout Aztec, including at the Aztec UFO Information Center and gift shop located on Main Avenue. Not only that, the town is also home to Alien Run, a mountain bike trail that was developed by Aztec citizens Al and Doral Sayas, designed in response to the Friends of the Aztecs libraries. Designed in response to the Friends of the Aztec libraries call for a mountain bike rally as a fundraising event. The trail circles the alleged crash site at Heart Canyon. In addition, the town now boasts a nearly UFO conference held at the Aztec Civic Center that attracts in droves both the faithful and the curious. The key figures in this puzzling story, Silas Newton, Frank Scully, and Leo Gabor, all are long dead, but their legacy ensures that whatever did or indeed did not occur at Heart Canyon in March 1948, the legend of the Little Man of Aztec in New Mexico lives on. Paul Kimball has investigated the case in detail. He stated in a recent conference presentation, did an alien spacecraft crash on the mesa above Heart Canyon Road in March 1948? Beyond reasonable doubt, absolutely not. There are still too many unanswered questions on balance of probabilities, however. Well, let's just say the jury is still out. As Stan Friedman has said, just because conmen told the story about Aztec doesn't mean that there wasn't a genuine Aztec story to tell. And that's about it for today. We'll pick up on Herman Lake tomorrow.